It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, lots of podcasts. Today's episode of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast with John Runyon, who's in charge of all of the discipline for taunting and illegal hits. That was awesome. Highly encourage you checking that out. Tomorrow we'll have Greg Cosell. Yesterday we had Steve Fezzik on the Even Money Podcast, who always makes a bunch of interesting observations, including taking the under in a couple games that you're going to want to check out on the Even Money Podcast. Hit me up on social, always. Love those of you that quote tweet or share or whatever at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod. He's Joe Dolan at FG_Dolan, the fantasy gangster from fantasypoints.com. Use the code 21Feast and use his brain, his big dome, his knowledge to know what to do, including, Joe, whether or not we should have a single solitary soul from the Bears and the Lions in our lineup.
Well, DeAndre Swift should be in your lineup, Ross. I was challenged last week. I said, could Tim Boyle possibly be worse than Jared Goff was playing? Yes, that is the answer. Tim Boyle could be worse than Jared Goff was playing. Per Pro Football Focus, and my guy Ian Hartitz came up with, pulled this. He was averaging like the lowest depth of target on his throws, but still was making the most turnover-worthy plays. So not only was Tim Boyle throwing the ball short, but he was throwing it inaccurately. So it looks like Jared Goff's going to go, which is, I guess, good news for the Lions offense. I mean, but you just saw the last time he was out there, TJ Hawkinson didn't catch a pass in 70 minutes of action. So there's really not a whole lot to trust with the Lions passing game. But Jamal Williams has kind of disappeared in this offense, and it has been all DeAndre Swift, who is no longer on the injury report.
Anybody for the Bears?
So the Bears, Andy Dalton, you and I have discussed Justin Fields on this podcast. And once again, I started him, Ross, and I've started him twice in my long-term 14-team keeper league with my college buddies. And over those 2 starts for Justin Fields, I've gotten a total of negative points. Look, he completed 4 passes in that game. He was not very good. The offense is not very good. You got Bears fans chanting and booing Matt Nagy's kid at his high school playoff game. I mean, it's just ugly there. I got to be honest, though. I think Andy Dalton gives the passing game a better chance to produce at this point. But the problem is it doesn't look like he's going to have Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson said he's working to get back, but he hasn't practiced yet this week. Darnell Mooney's been kind of the guy who even Fields was gravitating towards. Jimmy Graham has more targets than Cole Kmet last week. I don't know how that happens, but this entire franchise is a mess. The one guy I feel really good about in a matchup where the Bears are actually favored, God willing, I mean, they're favored. David Montgomery played more snaps than any running back last week, 95% of the snap share. He is an RB1 in a matchup with the Detroit Lions. I presume, Ross, you will be cracking your first daddy soda before this game.
No, I will not, because I will be in Dallas where the Raiders play the Cowboys. I will be calling that game for Westwood One in Dallas. So I need your insight. Raiders offense has been very sluggish recently, and the Cowboys look like they're going to have some dudes out, so people need to know what to do.
Yeah, so let's start with the Cowboys offense. As of now, Stephen Jones was expressing some optimism that CeeDee Lamb would be able to play. I don't have a database on this, but I can't imagine the guys who have cleared the concussion protocol in 4 days is very long. I don't know if he has a documented concussion, but just keep an eye on that, because let's work under the assumption that the Cowboys' top 3 receivers in this game are going to be Michael Gallup, Noah Brown, and Cedric Wilson in the slot. And the Raiders have some good corners. Casey Hayward on the perimeter. The Raiders have selectively shadowed with Casey Hayward this year. I don't know if they choose to do that with Gallup. If Cooper's out, by the way, he can't play because he's unvaccinated. If Lamb doesn't play, I don't know if they'll choose to do that with Gallup, but he's definitely the biggest threat on the perimeter. Nate Hobbs is one of the most underrated slot corners in the NFL. He's one of the Pro Football Focus's top 10 corners. So that's a tough matchup for Cedric Wilson. We've seen Dak Prescott coming out of the bye. The Cowboys have played 4 games. Prescott missed one of them, was great in one of them, and had stinkers in 2 of them. And I think one of the things that would really help him, though his career splits aren't awful when Tyron Smith is off the field, they have been a lot worse this year. Tyron Smith's practicing in full. It looks like he's going to be able to play. That should help Dak Prescott against this very good Oakland edge duo of Max Crosby and Yannick Ngakoue. Vegas edge duo, not Oakland. But Ezekiel Elliott's dinged up. He's dealing with a knee. He had the ankle that hurt him in that game last week against the Chiefs. I wouldn't be surprised if Tony Pollard returns some decent flex value, especially for those of you playing Thanksgiving Day slates. I think Tony Pollard's going to get the ball a little bit more than you might be thinking. Dalton Schultz as well is a good play in this one.
Dalton Schultz it seems like that's who Dak wants to go to with these receivers out, with Cooper and Lamb out. Let's get to so interesting. What about the Raiders on the other side?
Yeah, so the Raiders offense has been just it's been so hard to trust right now. Darren Waller, I don't know how you play a receiver here outside of Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow. And even Renfrow was a disappointment last week. But finally, Darren Waller's led the Raiders in receiving the last 2 weeks. He hadn't done it since week 1. Darren Waller's going to get the ball here. Bryan Edwards has been shut out in 2 of his last 3 games. Deshaun Jackson, who left the Rams so he could have a bigger role with the Raiders, has 1 catch in 2 games and he fumbled on it. So, this thing is just not going well for the Raiders. But here's the deal. This is from our guy, Graham Barfield, who we've had on the podcast. The Raiders have put in on their 3 games after the bye, they've scored just 16, 14, and 13 points. But here's the thing. They're actually moving the ball. They're gaining 7.9 yards per play on early down non-red zone plays. That's number 1 in the NFL. The problem is they've scored a touchdown on just 3 of their last 10 red zone possessions over the last 3 weeks. So the Raiders are getting to the red zone. They're just not scoring. Dallas's red zone defense has not been great. Wouldn't be surprised to see Josh Jacobs and Darren Waller get in the box in this game.
Ooh, okay. Very nice. Let's get to the nightcap. It's the Bills at the Saints. Speaking of struggling offenses.
Yeah, so there has been a lot written in the last number of weeks. And when a team like the Super Bowl contending Bills is struggling like this, a lot of people are going to try to decide what's wrong with them. Number 1, this is from Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. And Ross, of course, you've heard of Football Outsiders DVOA, which is just kind of a catch-all metric. According to Aaron Schatz, the Bills are the single most inconsistent team in the entire DVOA era. So they're either blowing teams off the field or they're playing down to their competition and getting beat by inferior teams, which is what's happened a couple of times here. Jacksonville, Indianapolis just ran the ball down their throats. Sheil Kapadia, who writes for The Athletic, who for my money, pound for pound, is the best national football writer, dug into the numbers and he said, they're really not playing that much differently than they were last year. It's just they're turning the ball over a little more and they're committing a ton of penalties. The offensive line has had some issues. Spencer Brown's been on the COVID list. John Feliciano with the calf is on IR. I think when Spencer Brown comes back, if he's able to play this week, that would be a huge boon for the Buffalo offense. And then also there's the old basic adage that Brandon Staley came up with earlier this year. The Bills have been unable to punch teams in the mouth with the run game. And they had a quote this week from Stephon Diggs, who has said, Matt Breida, destiny is all. He has added some spice to this offense. That was the quote from Stephon Diggs, spice. I think they're going to use Matt Breida a little bit more to try to get that run game going. This is the pass-heaviest team in the NFL. It was the pass-heaviest team in the NFL last year, but the run game is just not working. Josh Allen's throwing a few more picks. He's been a little more inaccurate than last year, and with that pass-heavy tendency, it's kind of resulted in the inconsistencies that Aaron Schatz has pointed out. I think, though, against a reeling Saints team, I think this is a huge bounce back spot for Josh Allen. I think it is a huge spot. Not that he needs to bounce back because he's been producing. A huge spot for Stephon Diggs to make a play. I love those two guys. If I'm building a DFS lineup, I'm probably building it around those two on the Thanksgiving Day slate.
What about now the Saints, who now lose Adam Troutman, who had been like their go-to
Best
guy, and even Landon Young, the left tackle?
Yeah, so their offensive line is banged up. It doesn't look like Alvin Kamara is going to play. We're talking here Wednesday. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. Haven't seen practice reports for today. Ross, Mark Ingram didn't practice on Tuesday. He's got a knee injury. So I don't know if the Saints are like, okay, you're a vet. You've got to rest because we're not going to have Kamara. Or is Mark Ingram actually hurt and in danger of missing this game? If Mark Ingram can't go, Tony Jones, who was just elevated off of IR, is going to be the running back for this team. They are so banged up. I mean, apocalyptically banged up. Adam Troutman was their go-to receiver. I had picked him up in a couple leagues, and I'm like, finally, I've got a tight end I can trust to get 4 or 5 targets a week. That's all I wanted. He goes down. So what are they going to do at tight end? Jawan Johnson, the former wide receiver, college wide receiver at Penn State and Oregon, he flashed in the preseason, but I don't think they trust his blocking. He's been kind of a healthy scratch. They might have no choice but to elevate him to try to be a go-to guy for Trevor Siemian. I would think at some point, given the state of this receiving core, going back to Taysom Hill is inevitable. But the guy who's been leading this team in routes run in the last couple of weeks has been Traequan Smith, who certainly is going to be popular on Thanksgiving Day slates. But I think the Saints are in a world of hurt right now. The Eagles punched them in the mouth last week. The Bills are pissed off. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Bills boat race this one.
You know what else is popular? Getting what you want when you want it. And you get that from AutoZone. If you want what you need ASAP, you can order online and pick it up fast with their free same-day store pickup. No waiting in lines or shopping to the store. If you're more of a I don't feel like going anywhere person, you can order what you need on AutoZone.com and get free next-day delivery, which is awesome. You can even order as late as 10 p.m., and your package will arrive the next day right on time. Every car is different. That means every car job is too. And that's why AutoZone offers you more ways to shop your way. Oh, and they got 6,000 stores. So help is at a moment's notice. Next time you're starting a job, start it by shopping your way at AutoZone.com with their free same-day pickup and free next-day delivery. Get in the zone. AutoZone. Who's getting in the zone, Joe, for the Bucks and the Colts? Actually, I know who probably will, and that is Jonathan Taylor, because he had the DraftKings Performance of the Week.
Of the century.
Presented by Bacardi Spiced Rum. How about these numbers? 32 carries, 185 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 receptions, 19 yards, 1 touchdown on 3 targets, by the way. 56.4 total fantasy points. He was $8,300 over at DraftKings, and he has provided a lot of spice to that Colts offense. He is the Bacardi Spiced Rum Performance of the Week. Will he do it again, though, against the Bucks, Joe?
All right. So I'm going to have you, Ross. I'm going to do a little bit of a guessing game here for you. The Colts have won 5 of their last 6 games. Here are Carson Wentz's pass attempts in those games. 20, 26, 51, 30, 34, 20. Can you pick which of those games the Colts lost?
Yeah, the ones where he threw the ball a lot.
Yeah, 51. That's the loss. The Colts have decided what those us fantasy guys, Ross, we knew it all along. You don't need to work in Marlon Mack, Frank Reich. You don't need to go into halftime with Jonathan Taylor having 4 carries and Marlon Mack having 5. Give the ball to Jonathan Taylor. Limit Carson Wentz's dropbacks. Limit Carson Wentz's ability to make those boneheaded plays. Limit Carson Wentz's ability to get hurt. And you're going to win football games. And that's what they're doing right now. The question is, of course, not that you're sitting Jonathan Taylor. The Buccaneers have been the worst matchup this year for running backs, at least on the ground. They do give up catches to the position, but at least on the ground, they've been a bad matchup for running backs. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Colts dial up some screens for Jonathan Taylor in this game. But the Colts right now are a 3-man fantasy team, as easy as it gets. You can play Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, you have to play him. Michael Pittman's a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. I think they're going to need to rely on Michael Pittman more this week than they did last against the Bucs, who are an easier matchup through the air than the Bills are. And you can play Carson Wentz in a good matchup. He really hasn't been a fantasy option the last 2 weeks after throwing multiple touchdowns in 6 consecutive games. I think Wentz is on the kind of fringy QB2 radar this week. They're a 3-man team, but obviously Jonathan Taylor is your go-to guy.
And for the Bucs?
And the Bucs, we'll see if Antonio Brown can get back soon. There seems to be a level of optimism that will happen soon. But Chris Godwin has been worth 5 more fantasy points per game in games in which Antonio Brown doesn't play. So keep an eye on that, because if Antonio Brown plays, Chris Godwin is probably going to lose some targets. But the takeaway for me for Tampa Bay is, even though Ronald Jones somehow got involved again last week, why? I don't get it. But Leonard Fournette is their bell cow. He plays on basically all passing down situations that aren't hurry up. And so Leonard Fournette is the bell cow. Tom Brady bounced back as we all thought he would. Rob Gronkowski's back, so Brady's throwing him the ball. I think Tampa Bay is going to win this game. I think Tampa Bay is going to take it to the Colts. I just think there's too much to defend, and I think the Colts are going to struggle to defend the pass here in this game against Tampa Bay.
Let's keep it moving, Joe, and get to the Jets and the Texans. Jets have a couple good young rookies, except one won't play now.
Yeah, that's Michael Carter. I did a little dig into the numbers before I came on the podcast here, and I was wondering, what's the deal with Zach Wilson vis-a-vis without Zach Wilson? And well, the Jets are throwing the ball a little bit more, and they're throwing it better. Zach Wilson is completing, let me give you the number, 57.5% of his passes versus 65.8% for Joe Flacco, Josh Johnson, Mike White. Here's the problem. Mike White and Joe Flacco are not going to be able to play this week. Mike White tested positive for COVID. Joe Flacco's apparently is a close contact, but he's unvaccinated. He can't play. Here is the key difference, though. The average depth of target, and I'm pulling these numbers from Sports Info Solutions, for the Jets without Zach Wilson is 6.6 yards. With Zach Wilson, it's 8.8 yards. So Wilson is way more aggressive as a downfield thrower than were the other 3 quarterbacks. But I actually think, now normally you would say, oh, that's a good thing. You want your quarterback to be more aggressive. But here's the problem. On an ADOT of 8.8, Zach Wilson is averaging 6.5 yards per attempt. On an ADOT of 6.6, the other 3 quarterbacks are averaging 7.4 yards per attempt. So Zach Wilson's aggressiveness is a detriment to him. And he is also taking sacks basically at 3 times the rate that the other quarterbacks were taking. So he's holding them onto the ball too long. He's waiting too long for things to develop, and he's trying to attack down the field. I would hope that the Jets have decided we're going to reel that in a little bit. We're going to get some easy completions. We're going to put the ball in the hands of Elijah Moore, who started to come on a little bit. We're going to put the ball in the hands of Ty Johnson, who is my favorite of the running backs here, because I think Tevin Coleman's cooked. But Ty Johnson has twice as many receiving yards as rushing yards this year. We're going to get the ball in his hands in the passing game. We're going to make things easier for Zach Wilson. We don't want him, just because he's got a huge arm, just because he's got a hose, don't need him throwing the ball 37 yards down the field on every play. Those are the things that I'd like to see the Jets do. The problem is things were worse for fantasy with Zach Wilson in the lineup. The run game started to improve because Michael Carter had started to come on, but now he's out of the lineup. It's really hard for me to trust anybody here. If I'm playing a receiver, it's Elijah Moore or Corey Davis as a wide receiver 3, and I am praying that Zach Wilson isn't taking all the hits that he was taking earlier in the season.
Joe, how about the Houston Texans? Tyrod Taylor getting in the zone.
Yeah, Tyrod Taylor, I think, is a viable quarterback streamer. But the problem here is, well, they cut Phillip Lindsay this week, but I still don't know what they're going to do at the running back position. And the thing is, the Jets are the matchup for running backs. I mean, Myles Gaskin came out and torched them last week. But what are the Texans going to do? I don't know. You know, is Rex Burkhead going to be the guy? He had 18 carries last week. David Johnson had 13 carries, but he gained just 18 yards. it just feels like I'm destined to get this wrong with the Texans running back. So even in this great matchup, maybe if I'm playing a bunch of DFS lineups, I'm going to stick Burkhead in there because he's going to be cheap and it's a great matchup. But I don't know if I trust a season-long team with that. And here's the problem. Tyrod Taylor scores 2 touchdowns, but he throws for just 107 yards against the Titans. Brandon Cooks has 2 catches for 18 yards. I mean, even Brandon Cooks is like a low-end wide receiver 3 right now. Not really much for me to say about the Houston Texans.
We've got the Eagles at the Giants, where the Giants have a new offensive coordinator, Joe.
Yeah, and I think not a moment too soon. The question is, does it matter in this game? Because the Giants' offensive line, I'm sure you saw the play that went viral, Ross. Brian Baldinger, you got to love Baldy, man. That guy just eats up offensive line play, and he talks about it like I don't like it's pornography, quite frankly. But he highlighted it, and Dan Orlovsky highlighted it, where the Giants ran mesh against zone with a 5-man protection against a 3-man rush. 3 receivers all ran into each other in the middle of the field, and the 3-man rush got home against the 5-man protection before Daniel Jones could even hit his drop. I mean, one of the most awful plays, and I don't know how the Giants are going to hold up in the trenches against the Eagles in this game. That's my concern. The Eagles are playing extremely well on both sides of the ball right now. The defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, who was very much criticized early in the year for his milquetoast defense, he's starting to bring the blitz. I think he's going to blitz the heck out of Daniel Jones. I wonder if Kadarius Toney and Saquon Barkley are going to be really important players in the short to intermediate area. The Eagles have been excellent against limiting outside receiver production this year. Darius Slay's playing at an all-pro level. I just don't think it's a good matchup for the Giants. I don't think it's a good matchup for Kenny Golladay. I don't think it's a good matchup for Daniel Jones. But I do wonder if Saquon Barkley and Kadarius Toney can get it going in the short to intermediate area. We'll see about Sterling Shepard as well. But the Giants are all out of sorts. Their offensive line was terrible last week against the Buccaneers, and I'm not sure how much a new offensive coordinator at this stage is going to improve matters.
What about for the Eagles, where you see Jordan Howard is likely to miss this game?
Yeah, Jordan Howard has been a big player for the Eagles, but Miles Sanders came back. The problem with Miles Sanders is the ball security. I mean, the only time the Saints showed life before the fourth quarter in their game last week is when Miles Sanders fumbled inside his own 10. So Miles Sanders has got to hold on to the football, but I can't imagine the Eagles are going to stop doing what they're doing with the ground game. I mean, the Saints by DVOA were the best run defense in the NFL heading into last week. The next 2 opponents for the Eagles, the Giants and the Jets, are the 2 worst. So what are the Eagles going to do? They're going to run. And look, the Eagles are a very simple team for me right now. Jalen Hurts is in your lineup. Ross, I don't want to – I think it's fair to victory lap this at this point because we're in week 12. I told you in August, I said if Jalen Hurts starts 17 games, he's a top 5 quarterback. You know where he ranks right now in total fantasy points?
1.
Number 1. Now, he hasn't taken his bye yet. He's 3rd or 4th in fantasy points per game, but the point remains. I mean, he's running well, and because he's running well, he's throwing the ball better. But the beauty for the Eagles is they got 2 guys in the passing game, and you have to play them both, Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith. Miles Sanders is an RB2 right now, and the giant killer, Boston Scott, is the number 2 running back this week. Don't be surprised if Boston Scott gets 10 carries in this game as well.
Ooh, okay. We've got Carolina and Miami. I thought Cam looked pretty good. I also like overcoming the odds, rewriting the playbook, delivering under pressure. The MVPs of small business lead their teams to victory all year long. Visa is proud to provide playmakers everywhere with more tools to help grow their business and help them achieve even greater success. Because the more people we can empower, the more we all win. Visa, a network working for everyone. Who's working for us in Carolina, Joe?
Sorry, Ross, I was muted there for a second. Cam Newton, look, you're right. They came out and they played pretty well. They were not aggressive at all, by the way. His average depth of target was just 5.6 yards downfield. Just 2 of his 27 passes traveled 15 or more yards in the air, but he took care of the football. DJ Moore showed signs of life. Robbie Anderson showed signs of life in the last 2 weeks. And by the way, I think you can play Cam right now. I mean, I'm kicking myself for playing Justin Fields over him in a league last week. It cost me a win. I mean, I'm kicking myself for it. He's running. I don't think his arm looks great, but he also doesn't know the offense. So I think he's given them a baseline level of competence that they did not have with Sam Darnold at quarterback. Christian McCaffrey. Not that you're sitting this guy, but just to throw it out there for you. He's been back from IR for 3 games. He's led the Panthers in rushing in all 3 games. Okay, that's not that surprising. He's led the Panthers in receiving in all 3 games. Oh, we're going to limit him. We're going to work in Chuba Hubbard, maybe a little Amir Abdullah. No, they're not. He played on 90% of the snaps last week. Christian McCaffrey, hammer RB1 down the stretch. And if not for Jonathan Taylor, probably the RB1, Austin Eckler in there as well. But, I mean, he's somebody that you play each and every week. This is one of those narrow fantasy teams, Ross. I'm probably not trusting Robbie Anderson at this point, but McCaffrey, Cam, DJ Moore, all solid options for you.
What about for the Dolphins, Joe?
Yeah, the Dolphins, Tua's played pretty good. In full games this season, he's averaging 19.4 fantasy points per game. Over the full season, that would rank him as the QB 12. So he has been a borderline starter. This is a tough matchup, though. Carolina is allowing the 4th fewest schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Brian Flores came out and said today, doesn't look like Devontae Parker or Will Fuller is going to go. Did you remember Will Fuller was on this team? Yeah. So Cam's going to get the ball. Tua's going to get the ball to their good players. And I'll give the Dolphins credit here over their little hot streak here. They have gotten the ball in the hands of their good players. They've really condensed the target tree to focus on Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki. And last week, they made Salvon Ahmed a healthy scratch in the backfield, and Myles Gaskin had both a season-high 23 carries and a 74% snap share in the backfield. So those 3 guys, Tua's a low-end starter this week. I don't love the matchup for him, but those 3 guys, Waddle, Gesicki, I like those guys. Waddle's a wide receiver 3, Gesicki is a hammer tight end 1, and even Gaskin, who I didn't draft at all this year. I didn't like him, but even Gaskin, like 74% snap share, I think he's somebody you can trust as an RB2 at this point.
Tennessee is at New England, Joe. Looking forward to this game. Who are you thinking from a fantasy standpoint?
Yeah. So here's the deal. Let's go to let's start with for the foremost, let's go back to our guy Aaron Schatz, who says, from a playoff leverage standpoint, this is the most important game of the week because the number 1 seed in the AFC is at stake here. So, at least the lead for it is. From a fantasy standpoint, this is as bad as it gets. As well as Mac Jones is playing, he's thrown just 67 passes in the last 3 games. His receivers are extremely touchdown dependent. Aguilar scored last week, but he has just 3 touchdowns on the year, and he hasn't topped 10 fantasy points in a PPR in any games in which he hasn't scored. Kendrick Bourne also has 3 touchdowns, but he's top 10 fantasy points without scoring just twice. Jacoby Myers set the NFL record, Ross, for being allergic to touchdowns before breaking his scoreless streak in week 10, but he hasn't gotten the catch volume he needs to produce. After topping 10 fantasy points in a PPR without a touchdown in 3 of his first 4 games on the year, he hasn't done that since week 4. So all these guys are touchdown dependent. Meanwhile, Hunter Henry is likely the guy you feel best about playing because of the nature of the tight end position, but he's gone over 42 receiving yards just once all season, so he needs a touchdown. And now you've got a 3-man backfield. Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, and Brandon Bolden, and I don't think Bolden's going away because they trust him in pass protection. So you've got all these guys. Basically, here's the deal with the Patriots. If you play a guy from the Patriots, you hope he scores a touchdown. And to me, for my money, the 2 best bets to do that are Hunter Henry and Damian Harris. And look, they're good right now. But for fantasy, it's a different story.
And then for the Titans, Joe?
Well, the Titans have made a very good case that running backs matter. At least very good ones and very bad ones on both ends matter because they replaced a very good one with a bunch of very bad ones, and they cut one of the very bad ones. Adrian Peterson just didn't have anything left. Dontrell Hilliard, he comes out and he gets carries on the first drive for the Titans. He plays the Jeremy McNichols role. McNichols has a concussion, by the way. He catches passes I wouldn't be surprised to see Dontrell Hilliard lead this backfield in touches this week. Just a little thought there. But I mean, Ryan Tannehill potentially won't have AJ Brown. He had hand and chest injuries last week. Marcus Johnson is on IR. Julio Jones is on IR. Westbrook Akina, he made his once monthly fantasy relevant appearance last week. But here's the question. We talked last week, and rightfully so. Would Kyle Pitts get the Bill Belichick treatment? Who gets the Bill Belichick treatment from the Titans if A.J. Brown doesn't play? I don't know. Just line up and play, I guess. Here's a stat for you that tells you how rough this season has been offensively for the Titans. This is from Alan Ball of 24/7. Adrian Peterson has more touchdowns as a Titan this year than Julio Jones. Womp, wow. Womp. Yeah, this is a really bad fantasy team right now if A.J. Brown can't play, Ross.
Well, then we'll move on, and we'll get to the Steelers at the Bengals. Thought Ben looked pretty good, Joe.
I thought it was the best Ben has looked in a while, and then their defense with no Minkah Fitzpatrick, no T.J. Watt, couldn't stop the Chargers. I think the Steelers got stated doomed on the pregame. There was a run of games that they hadn't given up 30 points, and my buddy texted me, Ross, I have a Pennsylvania group chat. I'm sure you have plenty of those. My buddy texted me, and he's like, well, the Steelers are about to get blown off the field, and though their offense had a valiant effort, their defense couldn't stop the Chargers. And, as strong as the Bengal offense is weapon-wise, I don't know if they have the explosiveness that Justin Herbert has with Joe Burrow at quarterback. That being said, with the Bengals, I think you just kind of got to play your guys. Obviously you're playing Jamar Chase. Obviously you're playing Joe Mixon. Tyler Boyd actually led them in receiving last week, and the slot is a place where you can attack the Steelers. Keenan Allen. Now, Tyler Boyd's not Keenan Allen, but Keenan Allen went nuts on Pittsburgh last week, catching 9 passes for 112 yards. So actually, I think Tyler Boyd's kind of in the mix this week if you want to use him. I don't think Pittsburgh is going to give up 41 points again, especially if Fitzpatrick and Watt can play this week. But certainly, there are a few more cracks in that armor than we're used to seeing from the Steeler defense.
And then for the Bengals, Joe, they didn't crush it offensively against the Raiders, but certainly late in the year or late in the game, Joe Mixon kind of took over.
Yeah, Mixon, obviously, Mixon is just look at the numbers that he put up in that game. Joe Mixon goes over 123 yards, scores 2 touchdowns. He puts up 24.3 fantasy points without even seeing a target. So he is a bell cow to the highest order right now. And the Steelers have one too in Najee Harris, who obviously is in your lineup. Deontay Johnson is in your lineup. That guy's really good. He just gets off of coverage so easily. Chase Claypool, man, it looked like he had Ross. We talked last week like he wasn't going to play, and he comes out. He practices in full on Friday. Wasn't even on the final injury report with a game day designation. He looks pretty good. And then your guy, Pat Freiermuth. Eric Ebron's going to have knee surgery. Freiermuth's going to run around on basically all of Ben Roethlisberger's dropbacks. He's a tight end 1 at this point, and Roethlisberger trusts him in the red zone.
Yeah, he really is. Okay. Did you say everything you need to say on the Bengals, Joe?
I did, yeah. We were.
Right. The last game.
Bengals are pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, last game is a rough one. Falcons and Jags.
All right, so this just goes to show you. Now, look. The Falcons couldn't have predicted the Calvin Ridley mental health situation, okay? They couldn't have predicted it. But it just goes to show you how bad their roster is. They've scored 3 points the last 2 weeks, and that's coincided with Cordell Patterson being hurt. Cordell Patterson is their most important offensive weapon right now. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's true. The one thing I will say here about this matchup now, this is a better matchup against Jacksonville. There's no doubt about it. But Jacksonville is starting to get a little frisky defensively. They're starting to get some pressure. And they're starting to get pressure in creative ways. And Matt Ryan has been under siege in the pocket the last 2 weeks. So don't be surprised if this one is a slot fest. If Patterson plays, you play him. But here's the deal. If Patterson doesn't play, I don't know who you can play in this backfield. Davis and Kadri Ollison split snaps in that backfield. Mike Davis looked awful. I think they've essentially benched him Wayne Gallman's been in and out of there. You can't count on any of these guys. And I think Kyle Pitts, he got shut down by the Patriots last week, but I don't think the Jaguars have the personnel to shut him down. You have to play Kyle Pitts, but this is awful. This is an awful fantasy game.
And the Jags, Joe?
Trevor Lawrence hasn't thrown a touchdown since week 8. He's completed just 54.6 of his throws for 5.1 yards per attempt and 146 yards per game over his last 3 games. And when you turn on the film, I think Trevor Lawrence looks pretty good. They have no personnel. I don't know what their offensive game plan is. Their most reliable receiver this year has been a converted defensive back in Jamal Agnew, who's now on IR out for the season with a hip injury. And B, Dan Arnold, the tight end they traded their top 10 cornerback draft pick from last year for, who doesn't even get targeted last week. Unbelievable. So Dan Arnold doesn't get a target, which crushed a lot of people. I will say this. With Agnew on IR, they're probably going to give more slot work to Laviska Shenault. And Shenault averages 2.16 yards per route run and 0.44 fantasy points per route run out of the slot versus 1.7 yards per route run and 0.36 fantasy points per route run on the outside. He's better out of the slot. So he's probably the best receiver option here for you with Jacksonville. But I think for most fantasy players, it's James Robinson or bust.
That'll do it for episode 1 of the show that's so nice we do it twice. It's Thanksgiving. We got some room for dessert. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Feast podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and the College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.